The digital age killed boredom, and that's killing you. She sat in the waiting room, phone already in her hand before she'd even sat down. 3 minutes until her appointment. 3 minutes that felt unbearable without something to fill them. When was the last time you did nothing? Not meditation, not rest, not sleep, just nothing. Sitting with your own thoughts, staring at a wall, watching dust particles drift through afternoon light. For most of us, that moment is so far back we can't even remember it. And that absence, that complete extinction of boredom from our lives, might be the most dangerous thing that's happened to our minds in a generation. This isn't about technology being bad. It's about what we lost when we made sure we'd never be bored again. She scrolled through her phone at every red light. Not because she needed to, because 45 seconds of waiting felt like suffocation. Her thumb moved automatically. Open app, scroll, close app, open another. A loop so practiced she didn't even see what was on the screen anymore. Just movement, just stimulation, just anything to avoid the silence. Neuroscientists at the University of Virginia did something cruel and fascinating. They put people in an empty room for 15 minutes with nothing but their thoughts. No phone, no book, no music, just them and their mind. But they offered one option, a button that would give them a painful electric shock. 67% of men and 25% of women shocked themselves rather than sit with boredom. They chose physical pain over mental stillness. Let that sink in. We've reached a point where our own thoughts feel more unbearable than actual harm. The city hummed outside her window, car horns, construction, sirens. She didn't notice. Her AirPods were in podcast playing, phone in hand, laptop open, 3 screens, 3 streams of information, all fighting for the same exhausted mind. This is what productivity looks like now. This is what we call living. But something was breaking. She couldn't remember the last time she finished a thought. Every idea interrupted by a notification. Every reflection cut short by a scroll. Her inner world had become a waiting room she refused to sit in, terrified of what she might find there if she stopped moving. Boredom used to be a place where ideas were born. Einstein called it his most productive state. Newton discovered gravity during a period of forced isolation with nothing to do. Darwin spent hours staring at barnacles. The Brontë sisters wandered the moors with nothing but their imaginations. Boredom wasn't the absence of creativity, it was the birthplace of it. Because boredom is where your brain finally gets to think. Default mode network. That's what neuroscientists call it. The mental state your brain enters when it's not focused on external tasks. When you're staring out a window, waiting in line, lying in bed before sleep. These moments feel empty, but your brain is actually doing its most important work. Processing memories, making connections, building your sense of self. But we've eliminated those moments. Every gap filled, every silence interrupted. Every second of potential boredom instantly medicated with content. We're the first generation in human history that never has to be bored, and we're discovering what that costs. She used to write stories, journals, random thoughts, scribbled in notebooks during lunch breaks. She couldn't remember when she stopped. Maybe when her lunch breaks became opportunities to catch up on emails. Or when her evenings became Netflix marathons she barely watched. Phone glowing in her peripheral vision, splitting her attention into useless fragments. When was the last time you were truly absorbed in something? Not distracted by it, absorbed. So focused you forgot to check your phone. So present you lost track of time. Psychologists call this flow state the optimal human experience. But flow requires sustained attention. And sustained attention requires boredom first. The paradox is beautiful and cruel. We avoid boredom by constantly stimulating ourselves, but that constant stimulation makes deep engagement impossible. We're too entertained to ever be truly interested. A Microsoft study found that the average human attention span dropped from 12 seconds in 2000 to 8 seconds in 2013. That's shorter than a goldfish, and it's kept dropping. Not because our brains got worse, but because we taught them that nothing deserves sustained focus. Why concentrate when something more stimulating is one swipe away? She tried to read a book that night. Made it 4 pages before her hand reached for her phone. She didn't even want to check anything specific. The urge was physical, automatic. Like scratching an itch that never stops itching. This is what addiction looks like without the substance. Dr. Anna Lembeck, Stanford psychiatrist and author of Dopamine Nation, explains it perfectly. Our brains are designed for a world of scarcity. Scarcity of food, scarcity of pleasure, scarcity of stimulation. But we've built a world of abundance, infinite entertainment, infinite information, infinite distraction, and our ancient brains can't regulate themselves in infinity. Every notification is a tiny dopamine hit. Not enough to satisfy, just enough to make you want more. So you check again, and again, and again, chasing a feeling that never quite arrives because the system isn't designed to satisfy you. It's designed to keep you wanting. And somewhere in that wanting, you disappeared. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just slowly, imperceptibly. The person you were when you were bored. The person who daydreamed, who wondered, who had original thoughts faded into a reflex, a finger scrolling through other people's lives, other people's thoughts, other people's everything. She sat on her balcony that weekend. No phone. She'd left it inside deliberately, like removing a splinter. The first 10 minutes were agony. Her hand kept reaching for phantom pockets. Her mind spun in circles, restless, searching for input. Then something shifted. A bird landed on the railing. She watched it, really watched it, the way it tilted its head, the iridescence of its feathers in the sunlight. How long had it been since she'd noticed a bird? Since she'd noticed anything outside her screens? The boredom didn't go away, but it changed texture. Became less suffocating, more spacious. Like a room she'd been afraid to enter, now revealing itself as just ... space, empty space, possibility. Research from the University of East Anglia found that boredom activates the brain's autobiographical planning function. When we're bored, we don't just zone out, we start planning our future, reflecting on our past, constructing the narrative of who we are. Boredom is literally how we build ourselves, but we've outsourced that construction to algorithms. Now the narrative of who you are is assembled from recommended videos, targeted ads, and engagement metrics. You are what you click, you are what you watch, you are what keeps you scrolling. And none of it ever reflects back to you who you actually are beneath the stimulation. She started small. 5 minutes in the morning. Just sitting with coffee. No phone, no podcast, no music, just her and the steam rising from the cup and whatever thoughts emerged from the silence. The thoughts were strange at first, uncomfortable, unfinished memories, unresolved feelings, things she'd been scrolling past for months, maybe years, but they needed to be thought. They needed space to exist. Cal Newport, author of Digital Minimalism, makes a crucial distinction. Solitude isn't about being alone. It's about being free from other minds' input. And in our hyper-connected world, we're never free. We're always consuming someone else's thoughts, someone else's performance, someone else's curated reality. We've forgotten how to hear ourselves. What surprised her most wasn't how hard it was to be bored. It was how much she'd been avoiding. Beneath the constant stimulation was grief she hadn't processed, relationships she hadn't examined, dreams she'd abandoned without even noticing. The entertainment wasn't just filling time, it was filling the space where her real life was supposed to be. Boredom is actually a signal. Like pain tells you something's wrong with your body, boredom tells you something's wrong with your life. But we've learned to silence the signal instead of investigating the message. We treat boredom like an emergency that must be immediately resolved with content, when it's actually an invitation to look deeper. An invitation we keep declining. She noticed it at dinner with friends. Everyone present, everyone smiling, everyone's phone face up on the table, waiting, just in case. The conversation happened in the gaps between glances at screens. Half attention, partial presence, nobody fully there, because we've forgotten how to be fully anywhere. And nobody mentioned it, because everyone was doing it. Sherry Turkle, MIT professor, calls this being alone together, physically present but psychologically absent. We've normalized a form of connection that's actually profound disconnection from others, from ourselves, from the present moment. And we call it community. But something was changing in her. The more she sat with boredom, the more her mind woke up. Ideas started emerging. Not borrowed ideas from podcasts or articles. Her ideas, weird, incomplete, fascinating ideas that had nowhere to come from except the space she'd created by doing nothing. Turns out, creativity isn't something you produce. It's something that emerges when you stop consuming. She started taking walks without headphones. The first few were uncomfortable. Her mind too loud, her thoughts too sharp. But gradually, the walks became the best part of her day. Not because anything happened, because nothing happened. And in that nothing, everything settled. What surprised me most wasn't just how a simple analog notebook changed my routine. It was how I started thinking in sentences again, instead of fragments. This isn't a recommendation, just something that reminded me what sustained thought feels like. I'll leave the link below if you want to explore what I mean. The science is clear. A study in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology found that boredom increases creativity, particularly creative problem solving. Not despite being unstimulated, but because of it. When your brain isn't busy processing external input, it starts making novel connections, seeing patterns, generating insights. But that requires something we've become allergic to: doing nothing. She realized her exhaustion wasn't from working too much. It was from never stopping. Not physically, her body stopped all the time. But mentally, she was always consuming, always processing, always responding to something designed by someone else to capture her attention. Rest isn't the same as entertainment. Entertainment is consumption. It requires processing. Your brain works to decode plots, follow arguments, interpret images. It feels like rest because it's not work, but it's still work. Real rest is the absence of input. And we've made that absence extinct. Dr. Sandy Mon, author of The Science of Boredom, found that people who were bored before a creativity task performed significantly better than those who were entertained. Boredom primes creativity. Entertainment suppresses it. We've chosen suppression. She started noticing what she'd been missing. The texture of rain against windows. The specific quality of afternoon light. The way her own mind wandered when allowed to wander. Strange, non-linear, surprisingly profound. These weren't profound thoughts. They were just ... hers, and they'd been buried under years of content, curated feeds, algorithmic recommendations. Somewhere beneath the stimulation was a person with thoughts that mattered. Not because they were original or important, because they were hers. When she finally picked up her phone again, something had shifted. Not the phone, her relationship to it. She could feel the pull now, that automatic reach, that reflexive check. But she could also feel the choice, the space between impulse and action. That space is where freedom lives. Your attention is the most valuable resource you have. Not your time, not your money, your attention. Because attention is consciousness. Where you put your attention is literally where you exist. And if your attention is always fragmented, always divided, always captured by systems designed to exploit it, then where are you? She wasn't fixed. There was no transformation moment, no sudden enlightenment. But something had cracked open. The constant need for stimulation had quieted, not disappeared, quieted, like turning down a volume she hadn't realized was screaming. Boredom isn't the enemy. Boredom is the reset. It's how your brain cleans itself, processes experience, builds meaning. Without boredom, you're just accumulating information without integration, consuming without digesting, living without actually being alive. And maybe that's why it feels so dangerous now. Because if you stop for even a moment, you might realize how long you've been running, and what you've been running from. She sat in that same waiting room weeks later. 3 minutes until her appointment. Her phone stayed in her pocket. She looked around the room instead, noticed the art on the walls, the worn pattern on the chairs, the way light fell through the blinds. Nothing was happening. Everything was different. The city still hummed outside her window. But now she could hear it. Not as background noise, but as presence. Life happening, time passing, moments existing, whether she documented them or not. Boredom isn't emptiness. It's the space where you remember who you are beneath all the noise. Tell us what moment hit you the hardest, and where in the world you're watching from. See you in the next reflection.